So good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Reading Through the Bible. We start every day at every Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock. But as you can tell from the scene behind me, as spring and summer approach, we do this more during daylight hours. It used to be, even just 2 months ago, it was pitch dark out there in that scene behind me, and now the light of day continues right into our time of study. So we are reading. I'm expecting there still will be some people that will be joining us from the Zoom class, which is where almost all of our active conversation takes place. So let's see if there's any people ready to join. So we'll just hang around here for a little bit until some people have a chance to come in and join us. One of the things I want to say for those of you who are watching on the YouTube, you know, this journey of reading and discussing the Bible as we go through it, as it's compiled, always produces new insights for me. Always. And this year in particular, I'm aware that this theology that hardship and difficulty in life follows from either individually or collectively the choice of human beings not to do what God wants people to do. And that, in fact, in these more ancient texts, when that happens, God just really does, in the minds of Isaiah especially, God really does just lash out in anger. And I think part of it is that there's periods of time, both in Isaiah's living time or in the time of Isaiah, or before Isaiah or after Isaiah's writing, where there's just a lot of destruction. There's just a lot of destruction, a lot of death, and a lot of destruction following some periods of civilization and building cities that are constructed through many years of labor and work, and then they're destroyed, torn down, one stone knocked off the other to the point where the cities are not even recognizable, and people are deported. Whole civilizations are brought to an end. And it's also almost indistinguishable, the intermingling of the Hebrews, ancient Israel's belief in one God is strong. It never fades in that sense. But there's also, throughout Isaiah, you're going to hear there's, you know, the gods of the Babylonians and the gods of the Assyrians, they do seem to exist. They seem to have power. The god of fertility, one of the punishments that comes upon the earth from people's disobedience or people's abuse of the earth, is that the earth becomes infertile. And that was traced to the capturing of the Babylonians of the god of fertility, who was captured and then taken down into the underworld so that the earth becomes barren and seeds don't germinate. And all of this is seen in the context of this is what happens, you know, when God gets really angry with us. Hello, Sean.
Hey,
how are you?
I'm just running behind schedule, so I wasn't able to get up there in time. So
That's
I'd
okay.
much rather see you in person than over at the camp.
It's funny. I thought I might see you tonight in person, but you're
I may, if it's not too late, I may just jump. I just realized it was starting, so maybe I'll come up if you give me 10 minutes so I can be there.
You can come on up. Nobody else is here yet. We got a few people that will be joining in the Zoom, but they're not here yet. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Let me try.
Oh, who's here?
Hi, Colette.
All right. All right. We'll see you here.
All right.
Oh, there's Colette. Hi, Colette.
Hi,
How are you?
I am going to be disappearing but listening for a few minutes. I gotta get together my 7 o'clock meal.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead, because we're not really ready to start yet.
Okay.
So I was talking to the online community a little bit to talk about, if you're just joining in especially, you know, I handle this with the kid gloves a little bit. The idea that, you know, we are working on, working with this text of Isaiah, which clearly sees God ready, willing, sees God ready, willing, and able to punish people for, I don't know, for evil ways. But the trace between Isaiah seeing it coming from God and whether today, whether I want to believe that God actually relates to people that way, are two different things. I don't see it that way, and I don't think Jesus did either. I think human beings have the tremendous power to destroy ourselves and to destroy life, and out of anger and rage, we go roaming the earth, even thinking it's righteous sometimes. But I don't think in the end that that's what defines God. I think it defines our ideas about God. And in this passage tonight, we get to see just an enormous explosion of rage on the part of God. And then what follows, I guess, is the good news, and that is after the rage comes and the scorched earth can barely exist, the chaos that was there in the time before creation has almost returned to the earth. And then God begins the work again. God renews the earth. Spring comes again. Life is regenerated. And another chance is given for human beings to be able to try to live this life that will sustain life instead of destroy life. I don't know. I say it's you have to walk gingerly with it, because you can clearly hear me, if you listen, disagreeing with some of these theologies, that, you know, that God is angry, and that's why the thunderstorm comes, and God is angry with us, and that's why the seas are rising, and land is being eroded with volcanoes. You know, Jesus at one point in the New Testament says, look, you're going to hear of cataclysmic events happening in the world, volcanoes and droughts and wars, but that you should be very cautious not to think that that is a sign of the coming of God. Or that somehow the new age of God is being ushered in because of those signs. Jesus clearly seems to stand against the tide of that way of understanding things. And Isaiah does not. Isaiah is ready to say these hardships, this capture by the Babylonians and the capture by the Assyrians, these are direct results of the people's unwillingness to live as a blessing to the families of the earth. And that, you know, for Isaiah, they signed treaties with, you know, ungodly nations. They found their security in things other than trusting God, and for that, Isaiah thinks you will ultimately always pay a big price. You will always pay a price. And I don't know whether that's God or whether that's just Isaiah's deep-held view that, you know, what he believes, what he'd like to do. I don't know. So I'm going to kind of just bide some time here a little bit. I know that Sean is on his way here. He's going to be here in person, and Colette is getting her supper set up so that she can participate. And here comes Melinda to join in the conversation. And I'm sure there'll be some others that will come along as well. Hi, Melinda.
Hello.
Now, how are you tonight?
I am doing just well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Are you home or are you driving?
I'm driving. I'm almost home, but
Oh.
I didn't want to be too late.
Oh, that's all right. We're starting very slow tonight. Some of our,
You were waiting for me.
I was. Colette is here. Barbara is involved in another meeting tonight, and Debbie, it's some part of Ramadan. She's not going to be here tonight, so we'll wait and see. Sean is coming live. He's on his way here. He'll be sitting in with me, and so it may be 4 or 5 of us. But we're just killing a little bit of time till everybody gets here.
No worries. Good evening, Miss Colette.
Good evening. I have to take food 5 times a day because of a pill that I have to take 5 times a day. So my evening meal is fruit and nuts. So if you hear crunch, crunch, that's me.
That sounds wonderful.
Actually,
add some cheese.
Yeah, fruit and nuts, that's good.
Yeah,
Fruit, nuts, and a piece of cheese is my favorite snack.
well, I can't have the cheese right now. It's just fruit and nuts. That's too much food because I have to take another meal at 9.
Oh my Lord, they just have you eating like a squirrel.
Well, but small meal, you see,
Yeah.
small meal. Because I got to get all of those gabapentin in there from the shingles. That's what.
Oh.
And if I don't take the pill, I get the pain and itching pain. So,
When did that start for you?
many years ago.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
here, I didn't know
And
that.
yeah, I had the shingles. Well, let's see. I had the shingles first. I think I remember I was out gardening on my little berm, and I thought I'd been bitten by an insect, but I had the shingles, and it went right through my eye to the top of my head.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh.
And then, after that healed, which I was left with this itching, which is the gabapentin is for, because I was blind on one side, I had no depth perception. So I was walking down a restaurant from our Christmas party, and I stepped off on what I thought was a platform, went head first down the stairs on my right side, and that's what crippled me.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh.
But I'm still here.
I know you are.
Thank
and
God.
You are a
Good.
witness to strength for me. I'm always happy to be in your presence, always. Speaking of recovering from calamity, hi, Judy.
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, hello. Yeah.
How are you feeling in your recovery?
Thank you for asking. It's coming along. A few little issues, but it's coming. It's in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's good.
You just need a lot of patience, and sometimes, there are days when you don't have as much as you'd like, but otherwise, I have no complaints. It's in the right direction. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and I'm glad to be here always.
Well, I'm glad you're here too. As I explained to the others, I know I have notes of absence from some of our regulars, so
Right.
our group will be a little smaller tonight. But Sean, who sometimes has joined us in person, is coming to sit here in the room with me, and so we'll have
right.
him joining with us. And Melinda is here, and Colette,
Good.
and
Good.
I'm thinking that maybe with the smaller group, we can finally get to the right answers. How's that?
And Debbie, Ramadan has started, right?
That's right. Debbie's at Ramadan, and
So she's going to be out, yeah, for a while. Right?
and
Okay,
yeah, and Barbara has another meeting tonight.
okay, okay.
So,
Well, you got a good group.
I'll be landing soon, so.
okay, all right.
Good. Good.
I always consider stopping by, Lou, on my way home, but then I think about the drive
Yeah,
after study. I'm like, oh.
yeah,
Because
that's right. That is the O.
I pass the church every day.
Well,
I come straight down 208
yeah.
and get on to 287 coming from the office. So I cross it every day, twice a day.
Well, I'm sure you say a prayer in our direction when you do that.
I do. I always think of it. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, maybe one night I can actually stop in for service.
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. Well, I do like it. I like it when all of you come here and join. I don't know, somehow the Bible study becomes, the group has been very consistent, partly because of the ease of the Zoom. And
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think
Yes.
we've
Yes.
figured out how to
Right.
make it work to our benefit. I've become much more comfortable with it than I used to be.
Yeah.
Remember
Glad.
how
Well,
hard?
that's the one good thing I can say came out of COVID.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, I remember in the first year how hard it was. It was so frustrating. I was ready to throw the thing out the window because people couldn't
Yeah.
get on. I couldn't get on. We never could meet each other. And now, I don't know, it's smooth. We figured it out. Don't have to have
Yeah.
a password or anything to get on. You just come and join in.
Yeah.
And then
you
when we're
gotta-
done, then you're home. You're already home.
It's
Yeah,
nice.
it's great.
Yes, it is great.
Yeah, I couldn't be there because I can't drive.
Right. So we come to you.
Right.
Yep. I Zoom to you.
Yeah. Where are we, Lou?
We are in Isaiah chapter, I don't know. I read all these so many.
No, we're in Psalms.
Oh, is this,
Yeah. I thought we were in Psalms
we
too,
are in
but-
Psalms. I'm sorry, I got confused between the two groups. Oh. Oh, that's the
Okay.
best news ever, that we're doing Psalms.
So the last one was Isaiah 24, which was horrible.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was sitting here trying to eat my Wheaties because Isaiah 25 is not much better. And I was just sitting here getting depressed about what we're going to have to read. And now you have shown a light into my life.
Good. What psalm? What
Psalm
are
number
we on?
2. We did Psalm.
Just two.
Yep, we did
Two?
Psalm 1 last week, and it was a
Okay.
big pick me up. And it was interesting. I have to say to the streaming audience, too, I apologize for the misdirection. I got the two Bible studies confused, so forget everything I said in introduction. Because that all goes to tomorrow morning. So that's the 10 o'clock. And instead, here we are in the feast of Psalm 2, which I thought I was going to do tomorrow. I'm going to ask you to hold on for 1 minute. I've got some notes that I want to make reference to. Wow, that's awesome.
Happy to be the bearer of good news.
So let's see, what's Ramadan over?
All right. So, we are in the wonderful book of Psalms. I mean, there's some parts of Psalms that are rough too, but the early parts are just very inspiring. So, that I needed an inspiration for tonight.
Good.
So, see where I wrote what I wanted to talk about tonight. Psalm 2, the coronation song. All right, listen, why don't we, somebody else is joining us now. Let's see.
It's Cheryl.
Oh, it's Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, how's everybody?
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
Yep,
Hello.
we're good. We're just getting started. A few people like yourself are just joining in, and we have somebody that's coming to sit in the room with me for the discussion. We're getting ready to read Psalm 2 and see what we might be able to glean from this tonight. So, would somebody like to volunteer to read?
Sure, I'll do
Okay.
that. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. Sorry for the horse.
That's all right.
Kind of throaty reading.
That's all right. There's a lot of words there to be choking on. There's
Right.
again, a lot of images in this one that are, this is a coronation psalm. This is a psalm that they thought were read in the rituals of presenting the king and calling down God's power and strength for the power of the king. It's long been a belief, especially throughout Israel, that whoever was king came to be king by God's anointing. That was how rulers came to power. It was God's will that they came to power. And in fact, you heard the psalmist writes that the king is referred to as the Son of God, and that God actually gave them birth. And so it's almost like an Egyptian concept that the king has almost the same power as God. So it's this psalm. There's others I like better. This one is interesting in that it gives the king the idea, the power that whatever the king says is the will of God, and then there's those particularly warm and friendly statements that, if you defy the king, you should be prepared to have, your life taken from you, and that God will grant that. And it's a message, this is a warning to other nations that, the Davidic kingdom especially was supposed to be a monarchy established by God, and therefore it was to be invincible. And it was supposed to be the way in which the world would find its, its pathway to doing God's will. And also the threat of God was in the armor of the king. I don't know. I'm going to read this one paragraph. The establishment of the kingdom of God by Jesus marks a radically new concept of royal power from that depicted in the coronation of the Davidic king. In Old Testament times, hi Sean, in Old Testament times, the nations of the world were portrayed as rebellious at the time of the coronation. Yet they would or could be subdued by the Davidic king. This psalm breathes an atmosphere of violence. I guess that's what I was responding to. That again, the king is pumped up with lots of power, and the idea is that if you resist this king, you're going to face not only the violence that the king can muster, but also the violence of God, that God is going to then carry out punishment against you for resisting this king. Anybody have any comments? We're in Psalm 2. Comments, thoughts, reflections? Everybody's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking.
Powerful. Mhm.
I think, so I'm just going to just ramble for just a minute here. I think you might agree with me that one of the problems in human society, whether religious or not religious, is that when people come to power, especially nations that have a god, the king is soon seen to have sort of inalienable rights. That whatever the king wants, that's what God wants. That's what the universe wants. And to resist the king, to resist the monarchy, is to literally fight against God. And I think it's hard for those of us who live in the year 2023 to even entertain this idea, to even entertain it for a while. There are nations today who probably still hold on to this idea, but especially after the monarchy, not this ancient monarchy, but the monarchy of England, and the belief that the king or the queen were appointed by God, and to disagree with the king or queen was to disagree with God. And you would expect the wrath of God to come down upon you if you disagreed with the queen or the king's government. We're a long way from there. You know, we are the children of revolution. We're the children that have argued that, that have argued that when in the course of human events, when the monarch begins to stray and no longer reflects God's will or the will of the people, that the people have the right and are indeed encouraged to rise up and say no, that this is not the will of God. So I don't know. This is a coronation psalm for when the king was being put into office. And everybody was warned, both in the kingdom and for the nations around them, to say, you know, watch out, you disagree or you come up against this king, and the God who created the world is going to strike violence and vengeance on you.
And it's curious, with this, the Waco rally that Trump, just presented his speech. And well, it was the pastor who got up, and one of the pastors there who got up and said that God has appointed Trump. So I mean,
What?
yeah. Mm-hmm. If you take a look at the description of the whole rally, there was the reference that that God was on the side of Trump, and it was a pastor that got up and spoke that. So it goes all the way back to biblical times. The connection of leaders being appointed, by God. It was kind of appalling to read about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, maybe there's an arrogance in me, right? So I hear that and I go, really? There are people who still believe that today? Like there's still people, I don't care whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden or anybody. I don't care who you are. I do not believe have to figure out how to say this for all of what it is that I believe. I do not believe that when a person is elected to office or comes to power, that person then uniquely represents God. I just don't believe it. They might they might win, they might have power, they might have a lot of people behind them, but I don't know, the record shows that political leaders who come to power and are very popular often end up representing the other side. They end up representing evil and and harm to the people. There is a drumbeat, excuse me, there's a drumbeat throughout the Bible that says, no person of power in the human community draws their power from anyone but God. And so if they are obedient to God's way in the world, they could expect maybe to continue in power, but if they are defiant of God's ways, they should expect that their reign will be very short, president, king, or whatever they want to be called. That God will not allow leaders to stand who represent injustice and abuse. But then, you know, when you're alive in the world today and you look at places like North Korea, and again, I always feel like I gotta say now, I know it's my prejudice. Do I know actually what's happening in North Korea? No, I don't. But my belief is that there's a dynasty in power in North Korea that respects not a single human being, and is a force for evil and abuse among the people. So where's God now? Where's the demise of that? And in the Psalms, you'll hear that question asked, and the answer always is, well, give it time. It just takes time. Evil empires will not stand. No matter what people claim for themselves.
I mean, I think history is littered with examples where people have tried to justify their claim to power by saying it's derivative of God.
Yes.
And that we as humans give some credibility or credence to that claim. So if you're in power and you want to stay in power, you claim that you are, you know, blessed by God and be the one to be in power, right? Like if you're the king or you're working your way towards king, whatever it is, to say it's divine or it has some divine blessing, then people believe it. Or there are many people believe it. Most of them, I think that's being challenged.
Yeah, and I think, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this was the Branch Davidans, and the pastor who said this, Donald Trump, is the anointed of God, and he's the battering ram, anointed by God. But as I was listening to you too, so many times even though the church and state is that so many times political leaders try to connect themselves and align themselves with religion. Look at Russia. The Russian Orthodox. How Putin is, has made friends with the Russian Orthodox, as though the religion supports, the administration, the political administration. So even though it's separate, it's interesting to see that that oftentimes a political leader will appeal to a major religion in the country for support.
Well, I think, go
I
ahead.
was going to say that's true in the United States too. Who was it, Jerry Falwell? I mean, every single person that ran for president had to go meet with him first and get his blessing, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's not that long ago that was common. Like, he had his audiences with both parties' candidates to approve.
Yeah.
As crazy as that sounds, but yeah, that's.
So it occurs to me that there's, and maybe you'll think this is too far off a tangent, but I think of how problematic this is when, for example, you'll have a fantastic football game, right? And the quarterback and the running back have had an amazing game, just unbelievable, like passes that nobody can believe. And then the interviewers come up to them and they go, so, what do you have to say? And they go, I thank God for this. I thank God for this. This is clearly. Now, I don't have any criticism of someone who wants to say, I see the hand of God in my life, but I get very squeamish by the use of this idea that, we won this football game because, it was like a gift from God, because I want to know, well, what about the other guys? Like, what's the story for the other people? Should they be interviewed at the end, the people that lost, and say, well, I don't know, God really hates me today. God is not with me.
It's interesting. I have a different take on that because
I'm sure, and probably I do too.
I think it's the guys before the game starts that pray to God to guide them during the game or help their team win. I think the athletes that thank God when it's at the end of an event, like I heard, I'm a Knicks fan, so Emmanuel Quickly had 40 points last night, which is he's only a handful of people have done that in Madison Square Garden. He thanked God for putting him in the position and blessing him and helping get out of the situation he was as a kid and I think more of that, I think that has more to do with it than thank you for letting me hit all the 3-pointers I hit, but giving me the skill and giving me the abilities or the talent, right? So,
Right, so
I see the before game when they're praying for God, I don't think that works. God's not picking sides
Right,
between the Knicks
right.
and the Bulls.
But you're right, the nuance of what I agree with you about, like anybody that's willing to acknowledge, in gratitude to God, the gifts they've received and all that. And that's why it's such it is a very slim razor between that way of approaching it and this other way, which I think is just sheer garbage, which is I've come to power because God is on my side.
Right.
There's a lot of people who win and a lot of people who come to power who, if you look closely, have no connection whatsoever to the goals of God in life. None. So they're arguing that in some ways that the proof of their godliness has to do with the fact that they win. That's my dad. My dad preached a series of sermons. Oh my goodness, it was probably 35, 40 years ago now. And it was fascinating to me as a young person listening to him because he preached about discerning the things that differ. And this is one of them. This is different. Giving God the glory, that's the old-fashioned way of talking about it. Give God the glory and say, I couldn't have gotten here if it wasn't for God. I couldn't have gotten out of my poor past and upbringing if God had not been a companion with me along the way. And I want to thank God for that. And then this kind of approach that says, I don't know, politicians, I guess, are more likely to use it, to say that you should continue to follow me because it's clear that I got here because God is endorsing my life. And God is the one that's endorsing me as a leader. There, I think, I'm done. I'm off your wagon. I don't care who you are. You use that kind of rhetoric, and I have no interest at all. If you want to prove that you're God's representative on earth, then do God's will. Do what God wants done.
But that's the slippery slope, right? Like you're on the right side of that argument, and then all of a sudden you're on the wrong side.
Yes.
Right. And I do think in professional athletes there is an undercurrent of this that's going on in the background. I do think a lot of these guys, there are pastors, there are mentors that are teaching them this and helping them stay grounded and helping them get out of bad situations, but then it can turn at that, if you do what I do, God will bless you the way he's blessed me, and that's the danger of it, right? And this is the common theme we've heard from the very first time I came, which is everybody using God as the defense for their actions, which often are in self-interest or to gain power or to get what someone else has. That's the danger, right?
It is.
That's the danger.
And it leaves you wide open. If you're not careful, you talked about the subtle shift that can happen, you know, when you start to believe, you know, like there's a saying, I can't say it, but, you know, where I'm at in my life is God's gift to me. And now, then, you start to believe that you're God's gift to the world, you know? But the problem is that if you hold to that, you have to be very careful, because what about the person that's moving along a pathway of wonderful path in life, and then they get an injury that is a career-ending injury, and they can't walk? Now what are you supposed to think? If the results or the progress in life is a sign of, if that's the only sign of God's blessing in your life, then what happens when it doesn't go that way? What happens, you know, and to go right into the news of the day, what happens when it's your 9-year-old child that gets shot? You know, what are you to think? How are you then going to carry this idea of results-oriented life being a signal of God's favor or God's blessing to then what can happen in life? And then where do you go from there? Which is that's the big safeguard against it, to say, you know, I'm thankful to God for the journey. I can say it for my own life. Thankful to God for the journey I've had in my life, for the times when, you know, I feel like I've been saved from my own mistakes and things have not turned out the way they could have. But I'm very careful with it, because there's just too many times, you know, where, you know, there's dear Colette who got shingles and it moved up in her eye, and then that caused the blindness, and then she fell, and now she's got a life-crippling, what's she supposed to think? You know, Colette, if you'd just done God's will a little better, maybe that wouldn't have happened to you.
God still loves me.
I know. And God's still blessing you. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree. I agree.
That's
So it's, and Sean, you're right in that part of what the entire study of the Bible brings up all the time is, what part of these readings and these witnesses are the result of the giddy happiness of people for whom things are going their way, and they decide this is God's way for the world now. You know, I'll give just the example here, since it's a coronation, the first psalm was a coronation prayer. I continue to be bothered in myself about how much Christian theology celebrates the kingdom of David, the dynasty of David. But if you look in history, the dynasty of David, it was a murderous dynasty. He went out roaming about in the nations. The promised land was a certain size. It was 13 provinces that were given to the 13 ancestors of Jacob, and it was laid out. There was a map. It was staked in the ground. And David became the king of that promised land, and it wasn't big enough for him. And so he used the argument that God was on the side of the chosen people, and went out and began to invade. He took his army and invaded, and when they invaded, you know, he would always be careful to say to his troops, now listen, we're going to invade these cities, and there's going to be a lot of wealth and everything. You keep your hands off the wealth. You're to kill all the animals. You're to kill all the children, kill all the men and women, and burn down all the houses, because nothing of what was there can in any way ever be to the benefit of anybody that takes it. And then he would take the spoils, and he would bring it back to Jerusalem and build gold statues, and had a storehouse of gold and silver and precious jewels and diamonds that funded his entire administration. And I always want to say, I want to know who celebrates that kingdom. You know, and the argument there and the argument in the text is that had to be the kingdom of God on earth because he was so powerful and he was so successful. But if you keep on that track, in the early stages of Saul's kingdom and the whole beginning of Kings as a way of God's will being done on earth, the sign which was written in the book was that you'll know this king is from God if their dynasty lasts. So if this king's son comes to power and that son then becomes powerful, David's kingdom was one of the shortest dynasties ever. His kingdom came to an end when his own son rebelled against him and led a revolution against him and led to his son being murdered on the battlefield. So I don't get it. I don't get it. And it's not just the Jewish celebration of the Davidic kingdom, but in particular Christian theology's celebration. And then they try to look to Jesus and say, well, you know, Jesus, why is it important that Jesus was born in Bethlehem? Because that's the city of David. Why is it important, you know, that all these things that are celebrated about the birth of Jesus, the gospel writers in all four gospels are trying to show that Jesus was a descendant of David. The genealogies that are done to show you, you know, this person had this child. And both Joseph and Mary are shown to be in the DNA line from David. And that's how the Christian church argued that Jesus was ultimately now the continuation of God's reign on earth. And I don't know, is it shocking for me to say, I don't get it. I don't get it. Because Jesus, his life, his death, his resurrection, none of it reminds me of David. None of it. I mean, we're in the Psalms, and as I said, a lot of the Psalms were attributed to David writing and singing the Psalms, but now I've found out that actually probably none of them were written by him. They were written to him. And so even the soft part of him that I thought was characteristic of him as a younger person, I don't know, I think David was a pretty hard guy. Are you looking for the group?
Yeah.
It's down the hallway that way. Yeah, no problem. Yep.
Interesting.
So, what do you think about that?
I think he may have, when he was a shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd.
Right.
Maybe he wrote that one.
Maybe he did. Well, and listen, they love to tell the stories of David as a shepherd boy. You know, David and Goliath. David.
That's the same David?
The same David. Yeah, David. When David was young, he was like the seventh son of Jesse, and he was anointed as king when he was just a boy. He was a little ruddy-cheeked kid, and he heard the threat of Goliath against Israel, and he said, "I'll fight him." And he went out and put his stone in his shepherd's sling and landed a rock between the eyes of Goliath and killed him. That story,
Yeah, but
go ahead.
there, in another place it says his brother did it.
Yeah, don't talk about that, Colette.
Oh,
No, you're right. It's the one tradition says that David is the one who killed Goliath, and then there are two other places that reference that Goliath was actually killed by somebody else. What are we supposed to do about that? Don't talk about that. Let's not talk about that.
Realize, you know, in Michelangelo's statue of David, it's very famous and very, you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, and now very famous too, because he's all naked standing in front of school-aged
Okay.
children, right?
so the legend and the legacy, you know, has been brought down for generations. Yeah, it's a travesty, but but what can be done? Nothing can be done.
Well, and I think, we've come through some very, very difficult parts of the history of Israel, and I can't help it. I still go back to the conversation between Abram and Sarah, where God said, I'm calling you to be a blessing to the families of the earth, and all the families of the earth. And then you see the rise, the kingdom, the idea of a king. Samuel said, it's the worst idea you've ever had. You're supposed to be the people who are able to trust in a God you can't see. And you're supposed to be able to walk in this life trusting God, even through difficult times, and continue to trust in God, and that will be your hedge, your defender. And by the way, don't forget, as you live your life, share your blessings with others along the way. David knew nothing of that. Once David defeated Saul, and he became the rightful king, he began to build a dynasty. And his dynasty was massive. And his
Not a dynasty, an empire.
yeah, an empire. But the dynasty is his kids. But at one point, Brueggemann, who's my hero, Old Testament scholar, says that if you look into the historical record and you understand what's talked about, these kingdoms, they captured whole cities and used them as slave cities to be able to feed their enormous appetite. They would throw parties that would start in the morning, and the food like they would kill 27 cattle, 120 chickens. The menu for the food, and this was more for Solomon, who was David's successor. It took 3 cities of enslavement to run the demands of the food and engorgement that took place in Jerusalem, because they were trying to show the world that they were God's destined leaders. You see this in other leaders throughout the world. When they become powerful, then they build these great big castles, and they have lots and lots of people in service to them. David was unbelievable in this way. And a lot of the wars that came about that followed David's dynasty, you can trace it. It had to do with David's assaults and his attacks on the neighbors around the promised land. And, they never forget. So they would come back, and ultimately the Assyrians destroyed the whole kingdom. They destroyed it all. It was all gone. Every rock was overturned. And then good-minded, Isaiah comes along and says, well, that's because they didn't follow the law of God. And then you ask, which law? And then Hezekiah and some of the others start to say, well, the main law they violated was the law of intermarriage. If the chosen people just hadn't married outside their race, then none of that would have happened. And everybody, it seems to me, in the narrative turns a blind eye to the violence of the, quote, people of God. Especially their absolute violence towards people who were their neighbors and strangers in the land. And I don't think that had a thing to do with God.
So your question and mine too is like, what makes them different than anybody else?
Yeah.
There's endless examples of that. Why
Endless.
are they special?
Yeah, why? They're not. They're clearly not special. David? Ugh. I just, sometimes I wish I'd never read it. Like, I wish I would have just stayed with the tradition. It was nicer when David was just the little kid that killed Goliath, and he was the happy ruler of the people in their height of their time. David's kingdom and Solomon's kingdom. Solomon's the one that built Jerusalem. It was a great time. Times were good. Now I look at it and I go, well, yeah, it's good to be king. It's not so good to be even a Jew, even a Hebrew person in the context of David. It was not good to be a servant of David. It was not. He would conscript your children to go into war. He had drafts running all the time, sent your children out to foreign nations of war. And the reason he went, he would always argue, was because these are terrible, godless people. And we need to go wipe them off the face of the earth. But what he really went after was their wealth. Because that's what he brought back to Jerusalem. That's what he brought back to the people.
Which he didn't share.
No.
I'm not sure that would have made it better.
No, yeah, if it's ill-gotten gain, I'm not sure, right, that it would have helped. He shared it. He shared it with the people that he wanted to have influence with.
It's not so different from what's going on today.
No, it isn't, and it's not any different than the claims that people make today. The claims that people make about why do things happen in the world. I don't buy it. I don't get it. I don't think David won his battles because God favored him.
It's hard to believe God favors or disfavors any. Like, I don't believe God is here. How could 3 9-year-old kids get killed or my nephew die 2 months ago unexpectedly? Like, it can't. That can't be the way that it works. I think God it exists for us to get through these difficult times and helps guide us and keep us grounded. But I don't think He's playing favorites or, it's hard to believe that when you see what's happening in the world.
Yeah, so what about the rest of you? Are you ever tempted to believe that, does God have favorites? Does God honor and have favors towards some people?
Go ahead.
I think God kind of favors all of us. Like we all experience difficult times, and I know in my life things could have been a lot worse. So I feel blessed. I feel favored in that respect. But also I think it's a way, like David he wasn't this possession person when he was younger. He only became that way. And I think it's important for us to stay grounded in God's word and grounded with other Christians, grounded in fellowship, that we can stay focused on what his teachings are, and we can let those other things go aside. Like we don't have to become these people who have to have all this thing, because riches you can't take with you. So if we're learning to be more like Jesus, to me that's the most important thing, to try to live our lives as best we can to be like Jesus.
Yeah, and I think.
But I think he blesses all of us. I don't think that there's any of us that, well, maybe there's people who don't feel favored, but I certainly feel favored, because I look back and say, well, there's different situations that happened that could have been a whole lot worse. They may have been bad situations, but they could have been a whole lot worse. So maybe we are all favored, and we probably won't know until we get to heaven, and we'll find out, oh, he avoided this from happening to us, and we did not.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'm getting tripped up a little bit on the word favored, because, growing up in a house of 7 kids, the worst thing that could happen would be that mom or dad would be revealed as favoring one of us. and that's loving one more than the other. But when you say the thing that we're all favored, I think it is, I don't know, some of the verses, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. The blessings of God fall on the earth, they come. And maybe the best thing that can happen to you is that you begin to see your life in a certain way. You see your life in a certain way. To go back to the sports person who has success in sports and then gives glory to God, gives credit to God for saving them and leading them through difficult times so that they would be able to arrive where they are. The greatest blessing, I think, according to Jesus, that you can have is a blessing that allows you to be a blessing to somebody else. And that comes with, I don't know, a few years ago, I was working on a sermon and just came across this claim that, the mark of a Christian is humility. It's humility. In the end, you follow all the way through what Jesus taught, even through to, we're coming up on Maundy Thursday, where Jesus, they're toying with the concepts of power and might and who's in charge and are we going to knock out the Roman government? And Jesus gets down on his knees and washes the dirt off of his disciples' feet. And in his life, he said, this is a model for you. This is the greatest opportunity you have. This is the greatest thing in life, that you could be a servant to someone else and that you could serve others out of love. So it's all the idea of wealth and power and all the rest of that in the life of Jesus just is tossed aside. It's tossed aside. And so the Christian church said that Jesus was favored by God, but for Jesus that meant it gave him a chance to talk to the Samaritan woman. It gave him a chance to be with the man who was born blind and to restore his sight. These are the kinds of things that become the blessings of God, that you become an instrument of God's blessing. And then that's really the definition of what success is and all the rest of that. But I don't see that emerging in reality from the Hebrew Scriptures. And I do think it becomes very tricky when, as a pastor, the hardest times are to offer a theology like this of God's love and care for everybody when, your child goes to school one day at the Presbyterian church and then comes home in a body bag. Like, the question then becomes, well, where is God? Where is God? And what am I to make of this? That's part of the big problem, is what am I to make of what happens in my life?
And what is your path at that point? Is it retribution or is it forgiveness?
Yeah.
As parent of the child who no longer exists. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and I want
all
to say,
those
yeah.
parents who had this class action suit against Jones.
Yeah.
Okay, that punishment, accountability, that wasn't forgiveness. Yeah. But
And-
that's always the choice, right? As the parent whose child has been taken from you.
And I don't really know, I can confess to you, sometimes people call upon Christians to be engaged in forgiveness, and I don't know, there's something really creepy about it. I don't know if you remember years ago, the milk truck driver who raided into the Amish school and
Right.
killed all those Amish children in that one-room schoolhouse, and 2 days later, they invited the mother of the guy who'd done this atrocity to come to their house, and they all got together and they acknowledged that they were able to completely forgive him for murdering all of their children. Now, there's something, I'm going to say this, there's something creepy about that. There's something not normal about that, because I think human life demands a certain amount of anger. I think anger is normal. I don't think forgiveness and anger are opposites. I think they're part of a process. You can't hop, skip, and jump over the early stages of tragedy like that. But they did, and so my view of it is they didn't really do forgiveness. They just swallowed it all. They just stuffed it all down in the name of God, and so good for them. I'm not them, and so I'm not trying to judge them. I'm just telling you, not for me. Not for me.
Oh, yeah.
I think, though, Pastor Lee, you're right about how it's about how we react and serve others, and I think least I don't know that I thought it fully through. I think most of this is random. The good things that happen and the bad things that happen are random, right? One of those kids could have had a cough and not gone to school today, and they would have been alive, or yesterday, and would be alive today. Or their mom took a wrong turn and got stuck in traffic. I think it's how we react to both the positive in our lives and the negative in our lives in support of others that is really what it's all about. And some of the best things that have ever happened in the history of man have come from absolute tragedy,
Right.
right? Like, the all-star athlete who all of a sudden becomes paralyzed,
Right.
becomes a great coach and helps all these young kids develop and go on to live successful lives. And he redirects his attention, or she redirects her attention somewhere else. Or, someone loses a child to a rare disease and they go on a crusade to find the cause and save hundreds of thousands of other lives. I think that's what the answer is here, is how do you find a way to turn the randomness of the good or the bad into something more than just your own benefit or your own grief? And how do you help others?
Yeah, that resonates completely with my entire approach as a pastor, because I always say, it was the Greeks and the Romans that wanted the answer to why. Why? And the Jews, Hebrews, and Christians who stay on the right track ask, what now? They don't ask why. They acknowledge that awful things happen. But what now? What is in front of us now, and how do we respond when terrible things happen? You can wait till, heaven and earth pass away and we're all in heaven. You can ask Jesus the why. But now the challenge is, what are you going to do now? What's going to happen now? And I go back to that great phrase that Joseph said to his brothers who had sold him into slavery, and he lived in the pit, and then he was in jail for a while, and then he became in charge of all the food of Egypt. And the brothers then are discovered, and the brothers are sure he's going to kill them. And he says those powerful words. He looks at them and says, what you did for evil, God used for good in my life. And I think of that so often in terms of, awful things happen. But nothing will make a parent of a 9-year-old boy who is shot come to an idea of why. But everything, to me, in God's universe will be working in the lives of those parents to help them to transform that tragedy, to change it into something that can be good, something that can be a blessing. And it's funny because
It might. They may choose a different path.
They might.
But I think that's the lesson.
You rolled off that idea about, a parent whose child gets, a terrible disease and dies. And
Yeah.
one of the people that watches this live stream is my friend Peggy DeCapua, whose son at, 3 years old, beautiful, healthy baby boy, developed Batten's disease. Almost an unknown disease, but among the people that get it, he got it, and his brain deteriorated. It just deteriorated. And he was dead at age 6, and Peggy has gone on. She is now, I think it's just national, but global representative of Batten's disease families, helping them to get together when it's diagnosed, helping them to, keep their lives on track and to deal with the grief. For her, it became not why did this happen, but what now? What now? And what does it mean for me to give my life, whatever I feel meager there is of it, into God's hands to be used for the benefit of others? To me, that now I get excited about Abram and Sarah, and I get excited about the whole chosenness thing, because we are chosen to do and to live our lives that way, because I think that's how God works in the world. I really don't think, we're going to run into more of it in the rest of the Psalms, but I don't believe that you can look around and go, well, which nations are rich and powerful? Oh, well, they're the ones that, that are doing what God wants. And which nations are poor and struggling? Oh, they're the ones that aren't doing what God wants them to do. I mean, obviously, that's an oversimplification, but it's a cautionary tale to be very careful. Our lives are not visible in that way in terms of who's doing God's will or living life the way God wants them to in relationship to the kinds of material success that can come in life. Instead, I don't know. I remember also there was a preacher who was telling a story about a friend of his that was in seminary. And the seminary friend was going back to visit a college friend who had taken the pathway in business and had done quite well in business. And he was actually quite wealthy. And so the seminary guy went to visit his friend, and he said, look, why don't you come to my house? And he said, okay. So he went to this guy's house, and he was expecting to see a big, wonderfully built house with a lot of, like, all the creature comforts of everything. And when he got there, it was not. It was a very simple, humble abode. And he said to his friend, the seminary guy said to his friend, well, where's all your jewels? Like, where's all the precious stuff from your way of life? What are you doing with all your money? And the guy said, get in my car. So they got in the car, and he took him down to the inner city area where they had built this city center for responding to kids who were living in poverty. And he walked his friend out onto the playground where there were, like, I don't know, 50 or 60 kids. And this friend turned to his seminary friend and said, here's my jewels. Here they are. Here are the things here's the rewards that God has given me. And this man had lived his life to construct a means of blessing in the world for people. And so, of course, he tells that story. Unfortunately, he tells that story as a part of a stewardship sermon where he tries to get people to give money to the church. But no, nonetheless, it's still a true story. And I think that connects in the way we talked last week about how important it is to keep yourself surrounded by people who see the world that way, so that the community around you is encouraging you to use your eyes that way and your sense of success that way, so that you can continue to be the blessing that God has called you to be, and to use the blessings that come in your life, whether it's your health or your wealth or just, I don't know, it doesn't have to be massive, just anything. And I'll shut up now.
When you ask the question, what, that should be the question. And you think about your example, and also I think about Gabby Giffords, who was shot, and what did she do? Her husband set up this whole gun violence organization, and so I guess a lot of this, then, some of these innovations or some of these attempts at change come out of these disasters. Whether or not they can be that effective is something else. But it is interesting that, and of course, you begin to wonder, does there have to be a disaster to affect change?
Well, I think
That's the origin of. And this is gonna sound minimizing the terrible things that have happened recently, but I think what you're alluding to is what everybody calls the silver lining, right? Everybody looks for a silver lining in all that happens that is bad, and it sounds trivial when you're hearing about children getting killed and stuff, but I think it will, hopefully it leads to something, right? Like,
lead to, but then there's the dark side. I mean, here is Gabby Gifford, this woman whose, brain and so forth is so damaged, and yet she survived, and she thrived, in terms of change.
And you're right, there is the dark side, because there's already.
Yeah, because there's already opposition
There's
and
already a rally cry for
against any kind of
Well, but yeah, and a rally cry against the churches who have ostracized or not viewed transgender or other types like that the way we might have. I mean, I've already seen today a number of posts where there's a rally cry to go do this to all the churches and start going in and kill them all because they don't recognize this. So, I mean, I do think you're right. There's the dark side and there's the good side. And it's all about how you respond and how people act and then help each other get through these difficult times.
Yeah, it's what do you make of it? Well, again, my little simple thing is, I know why comes up, and it will always come up, but it's more of a what. Now what? Now what? What can happen now?
But now what keeps repeating all of these shootings, little, being killed, and each time there's an attempt to change and to control, and each time it falls. And then you read in the paper the next day, so the same thing happens over and over. What? So you've done a now what, but it hasn't worked. It seems to be repetitive. You keep trying, of course, but then the bigger question is, why? Again, it's the why question. Why isn't it effective? Why isn't it working?
Well, I don't even think, I think it's dangerous to limit the now what to say, well, what are you going to do about the fact that your 8-year-old child got killed? I think there's a million ways. There's a million ways that you might see your life taking on new value and new direction because your child was killed.
Yes.
It may or may not be about gun control or even, I think the problem is massive in our society because we live in a very violent society. We have a very violent society, and I feel like, it's like I'm almost not one to talk about it because, my favorite, if I say this to you, I hope you won't think poorly of me, but, I spend a lot of time talking about peace and justice and loving each other and working and trying to care. But, when I go home and kick my shoes off, I love watching the violent movies. I just do.
We all do.
Obviously, but obviously a lot of people do because you look at what comes on television and a lot of it, I was thinking the other night, I really need to watch less people dying by gunfire, because there's so much of it that's paraded in front of me. And I'm not even saying, oh, this is a way to solve it, or anything. I'm just thinking about my own life. I live in a society that believes solutions come through violence. And that especially the most intoxicating ones are the ones where the stories are well told and they're not deep, but the idea of revenge or vengeance.
Good versus evil.
Yeah, good versus evil, and ultimately good wins when good has a bigger gun or good has a smarter person that can outfox and then can destroy the bad guys. The movies are not over until the bad guys are destroyed. And I'm smart enough to go, what are you doing? Why are you rehearsing that myth? It's just not the way life is.
Aren't they just using the Bible as the basic script?
Yes, they are.
Every movie, everything is based off the Bible. Good versus evil, father and son, Star Wars is all, it's all back to the basic script of good versus evil and human triumph over evil and using, accumulating power and crumbling and, all that.
I don't want to keep going back to Trump, but remember that he held up the Bible during that protest down in the village, but it was upside down, of course, because.
Yes.
But
listen.
Again, it looked good, and pulling God, into the protest. And he was the champion of God, holding up the Bible upside down,
And I think that's why we started out talking about how you have to be very careful about invoking God. Because to Sean's point, these stories that we see, they all have this idea about vengeance and revenge, and that violence is the pathway to win. It is part of the biblical narrative, but there's another part of the biblical narrative that you can miss entirely You can miss it, and it's in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, that challenges that view, that challenges the idea that, God is the God of vengeance and that you're on God's side when you seek revenge for those that have committed injustice against you. That is not the golden thread that goes through the Bible. It's the decoration around the edges and the distraction, but core throughout the Bible, what's held up, and the more I'm reading and listening to the readings of Islam and also of the Jews, for the Jewish faith, it's God wins through hospitality. God wins through neighborliness. God wins through God changes the world through these soft things that we would think, that can't possibly be strong enough. And we don't know the stories of people who have changed the world through conversation and through nonviolent confrontation. We only seem to tell the stories of when violence rears up and then, the bad guys lose and the good guys win.
And then every now and then you have someone like Gandhi who preached nonviolence and still the overthrow of a colonial empire.
Yeah, powerful. It was proven to be very powerful in terms of creating change, but it didn't feel as good as vengeance and war does.
Noisy.
It just doesn't feel as effective.
Yeah.
Let's read the next psalm. That would be what, Psalm 3, right? Or did we just do that? No. Yeah, let's read Psalm 3. I think it'll be good for where we've gotten ourselves in this conversation.
All right, you want me to do that?
Okay? Yep.
Psalm of David, when he fled from Absalom, his son. Lord, how have they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. Many there be which says of my soul, there is no help for him in God, Selah. But thou, O Lord, art a shield for me, my story, and the lifter up of mine head. I cried unto the Lord with my voice, and he heard me out of his holy hill, Selah. I lay down and slept. I awakened, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of thousands of people that have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for thou hast smitten all mine enemies upon the cheekbone. Thou hast broken the teeth of the ungodly. Salvation belongeth unto the Lord. Thy blessing is upon thy people.
So, what do you hear? I don't know.
Broken teeth.
Broken teeth. The teeth of his enemies. So this is a psalm that was written not by David. It was a psalm to David. The introduction says a psalm of David, but it's a psalm that was written trying to imagine what it was like when David was fleeing from his son. Absalom was his son. I remember I told you that in David's reign, there were clues that he wasn't really living according to the way God wanted because his own son led a rebellion against him, and he had to go into hiding to keep his son from murdering him. That's not exactly the example of, a God-blessed family. But so the writer is trying to imagine what it felt like for David during this time and crying out to God to protect him and to hold him up and to sustain him so that he could go on to somehow live out the call of God. But again, you'll see it, give me victory, O my God, oh, that you would smite all my enemies on the cheek. You can't blame the person for praying that God will defend him or believing that God will defend you when you're in trouble. But it stretches, for me, it stretches the idea a little bit when he's referring to everybody that's after him as the wicked men. One of them happens to be his son. Victory belongs to the Lord. So those that are the winners of the battles are the ones that can argue that God was on their side. You think that all the winners in life, that all the winners in the world are the ones that represent God's way? I know I don't.
And then I think of the Middle Ages and all those, yeah. Mhm. No, there were no winners.
And maybe perhaps the winners are winners in their own view, but maybe not winners to everyone. Like they might be, say, the athlete who's good on the court, but has all kinds of personal problems, abusing women, gun violence, things like that. So they're only a winner on the court, and I just can't look at that person as a winner.
Right.
It's hard to see them as a winner. So they may just be good in that one area, but having that balance in their lives to keep trying to get better at everything that you do in your life, that's a winner to me.
Yeah, and also being careful about how you define what the wins are and what the losses
Yep.
are, right?
Yep.
I mean, what looks like a win may, if you look closer at it, may ultimately not be a win at all. It might be a loss for the world or a loss for your spouse or something else, but you're so wrapped up in yourself that you can't see that. And so you're just living your life. And it comes back again to, like, okay, the call of God about the secret of life is to use the means and the methods of life for service. It's for service for others. And that is the definition of victory. That's the definition of winning. I think in this case, the psalmist, the writer of the psalm, was imagining that David was pleading for his life so that he could live and get on to be a blessing by building the kingdom and making everything that he was supposed to do. So he was pleading with God to save his life. But at the time that Absalom is rising up against him, again, I wish I'd never read the story, but his son is trying to kill him because he's become a murderous king. The story in my childhood, in church, they always told the story of David and Bathsheba. David had several wives, but he looked out his balcony and saw the most beautiful woman in the world in the little poor man's vineyard next door. And he invited her to come up to his place. And then while she was visiting him in the castle, he sent her husband off to the front lines. And when they went to the front lines, he told his general that while they were in the middle of battle, that there was supposed to be a secret command and that everybody was to fall back. And the only person who didn't know the command was Bathsheba's husband. And so he was murdered on the battlefield, fighting for David, while David was at home seducing his wife. And he ended up marrying her. He got married to her because she was a beautiful woman. And of course, in that case, they told, in my growing up, they told, well, David had an affair, and he was forgiven for that. So that was, God forgives people that have an affair. And in my adult life, I go, really? Let's not talk about the affair. Let's talk about the murder. Let's talk about the cold-blooded, premeditated murder of this poor man who had nothing in his life except a wife, and David took that from him. He took his life from him.
Yeah.
And that's the beginning. In the end, that's part of the reason why his son Absalom can't stand him.
It's interesting that in the psalm he doesn't seek forgiveness.
No, he does not. No, that's a really good point.
He doesn't say, I'm sorry for what I've done. He just says, everybody's out to get me. I trust you, and please bless me. And
Yeah.
I hope I make it away from their knives.
Right. There's no real questioning about why is this happening to
Right.
me. Like,
No
right.
self-reflection.
What do I need to do differently next time so that I end up in a cave hiding from my son's murderous rage toward me? I mean,
Who was the son's mother? Do you know?
I'm thinking, the son's mother was, I want to say that it was Bathsheba. I think it was. But, yeah, it was. So Absalom is not their first son. So from their affair, Bathsheba gets pregnant, and she gives birth to a son, but the prophet comes and explains that son dies. So the child of their illicit affair dies. And again, here comes this whole idea that, you know, God punishes your evil ways by, you know, okay. I know I got to hold that at distance a little bit because be careful. You know, like, that wasn't that son's fault. Why does that son get punished with death? And what happens then at that time is the prophet comes to David and says, look, the jig is up. We know what you did. We know that you tried to hide all this, and you are a terrible, terrible person. And David goes into grief over the death of his son, and he is in grieving for so long that the people almost get ready to overthrow him as a king because he won't get out of bed. He's depressed. Oh, it was?
That changed this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was, what's her name?
Maachah.
Oh, Maacah? I don't know. Sean just looked up who Absalom's mother was. It was one of the other wives.
Oh, okay.
He had
'Cause
a
I was
few.
going to say, if it was Bathsheba, then she lost a son. Also, it was her son, the double.
Yeah, this was a different wife. David had a lot of wives. So I'm guessing he had a lot of
I
children.
guess that's okay.
To different, yeah. He had a lot
I
of.
mean, we have a civilization that allows a lot of wives in sequence, but not all at once.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Solomon was Bathsheba's son. And so he comes along after this rebellion of Absalom and then becomes the king. All right, my friends.
And in an organization chart.
I was hoping the Psalms were going to sing a sweeter song to us tonight and maybe stir our thoughts of reverie, but I don't know. It didn't happen quite so much for me. We'll have to be open to it for another time.
Next time.
Yeah. So that'll be it for tonight. I thank you all for coming, and I look forward to talking with you next week. Let's see, next week is the Wednesday before Palm Sunday. No, let's see, is Palm Sunday? Palm Sunday is this week, right?
Palm Sunday.
Right, so next week is Holy Week, so we'll still have Bible study on Tuesday night and Wednesday, and then we have the Maundy Thursday service on Thursday. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Good night,
Stay
everybody.
well.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
All
night.
right,
Good night.
Talk to you
Good
later.
night. Thank you.
Yeah.